Good afternoon, everyone. Here we are again in inferential reading. We are now moving on to the third unit of this course. If the first unit was about, what was it? About the theories of inferential reading, and the second one was about arguments or inferring non-fictional works. Now, in the third unit, we are going to start inferring literary works. Since you are now studying English literature and you also have other classes related to or more focused on literature, then I believe this unit in particular is not inseparable from the other classes that you will or you are now taking. Like now you are taking Introduction to English Literature. You learn about literature and probably start analyzing literature, right? Now, what you learn in this unit is also applicable in that one. Later on, you will be taking popular literature. You will be able to apply this method of analyzing literary works in that class as well. All right, now let me share with you what I have prepared for you so that you don't just see me, right? Okay, guys. Now, here, the main target of doing this or learning to infer literature is for you to be able to get out of the literary works that you read more than just stories. Literary works are written about human life. It offers possibility of seeing life that you might not have seen in person. So there's so much literary works can offer to you. Then reading it in the right way or in a guided way will hopefully be able to make you get more out of the literary works that you read than just stories. Okay. All right. Now let me go to the first part. The first thing that I wanted to highlight is the key points. Okay. Throughout this, I hope you keep these key points in mind. The first one is that this is a basis for literary appreciation or literary critique. Why is it a basis for that? Because it will teach you how to approach literary works. And here today, we will be talking about fiction. Now, how do you approach that? It's by asking the right questions. And what are the right questions? Basically, you already know the questions to ask, right? It can be lexical questions, it can be logical question, or it can be elaborative questions. These are what you will also try to apply. Most of the time, we don't really use lexical questions because you can easily find the answer in dictionaries. However, there are moments when you might want to ask such questions like, why is the name of this character such and such? Because it will eventually lead to answers that you might not have expected. So yeah, asking the right question is what you will be practicing here. And in literary analysis, you have to ask questions to start this project. A thesis, one of the most important parts of a thesis is called problem statement, which is basically the statement of problems or questions that you have before you start the thesis. So learning to ask the right questions is important. The second thing is that there is an emphasis on, first of all, representing the work. Representing here is like retelling the work in the form of a summary maybe, or in the form of details. And after representing the work, then you can start making your interpretation. Your interpretation might be wild, okay? We all have different capacities of imagination. So our interpretation can also be affected and it can be wild. However, it is still possible to have that as long as there is an indication in the text that triggers that wild interpretation. Or in short, you can always point at the text maybe one sentence or two that made you think that the interpretation can be like this. So yeah, first of all, representing the work is important. Retelling the theme or details of the work is important before going to the interpretation. So don't jump into interpreting unless you already have presented the work. Okay, now the third one, which is the last one, is about this question: how is it scientific? We tend to see that since interpretation is the main key of literary analysis or analysis of philosophy, for example, we tend not to see this kind of project as scientific because we have the perception that what makes something scientific is if it is done with certain methods which can be done by other people as well, or can be replicated by others, so that what we get from doing this project with this method is the same as when somebody else does the project with such methods. So replication is the key to science, according to, well, that's what we mostly perceive. However, that is not really applicable in the field of humanities or liberal arts, like what we are now doing, including such as anthropology, sociology, literature, philosophy, and so on. Okay, it is not really possible to apply that that standard of science. So, what is the standard of science in interpretation? You have learned it actually. The standard of science or reliability of our analysis relies on how good we provide evidence for the claim that we make and how good we explain that evidence. So claim, evidence, and warrant, these three elements are what make your interpretation scientific. All right. If you have any question, feel free to stop here and type something in on Microsoft Teams so that you don't forget it. Next is, how do we infer fiction? This is the main part of our session today, right? So how do we infer fiction? I mentioned to you earlier that the first thing is representing the work and then interpreting it. Now, first two steps are about representing the works. We can represent a work by making a summary. You know a story and you make a summary of that story. And a good summary can be as simple as somebody, once, but, so, then. And this is a simple formula that I learned from my son's elementary school teacher. Somebody here represents the character of that story. A story usually has a character, okay? Or two, or whatever. It can be as many as possible. And then wants or does here represents the obsession or the purpose of the story. What is the purpose of that main character? What does the main character want to do? What does the character do? And so on. So the obsession is the important or purpose. Then, but here represents the conflict of the story. So is how the character eventually tries to solve that problem, tries to get around the problem, or this is when we are about to see the end. And then is the result of the main character's attempt to solve the problems which has hindered his purpose. Yeah, this can be as simple as that. If you want to use an example, my favorite example is Finding Nemo. In Finding Nemo, the somebody is Marlin and Nemo, the two main characters. And they get into trouble, which is Nemo getting caught. So that's just the beginning, okay? Two people seeing a situation. So The second one is Marlin wants to save Nemo, but Nemo is so far away in Sydney. It's not easy for Marlin to find Nemo. So he tries to do whatever he needs to do, and he meets a lot of people. He braves any obstacles. Then they eventually meet. You can almost always summarize a story in that manner. Somebody wants, but so then just find the characters, the obsession or purpose, the problem, the conflict, and how the character tries to get around the conflict or solve the conflict, and how it eventually ends. So summarizing is the first stage there. After that, we will go to understanding more details of the story. If we talk about fiction, then the details include what? The details of a fictional work can include the character, the plot, and the settings. These three elements are almost always there when we talk about prose. Some experimental works might not have a plot or a setting or characters, in fact, but that is not the norm, pretty much, right? Only experimental works are like that. But most literary works or most fictional works, they have these three elements. Try to go into the details. And how do you understand the details? It's by asking the questions. You ask logical and elaborative questions to find out or to understand these details. I will talk about it in the next slide, okay? So don't worry. Just know for sure now is that we need to ask elaborative and logical questions. Finally, after summarizing it and knowing the details, then you can say, you can propose your interpretation of what the theme of the work actually is. And this is something that you come up with. It's not the moral of the story which the writer writes here. When we talk about literary works, serious literary works or popular literature, we don't really work with moral of the story anymore. Moral of the story, that's something that we commonly find in children's books, which are intended to be didactic, to be teaching, okay? But most literary works, we will do the teaching ourselves. So we interpret the message of the story. And this message of the story is pretty much what the story wants to tell us, not what the writer wants to tell us, okay? So please remember, it's not the moral of the story. It's not what the writer intends to say or intends to tell us. And it's our interpretation. But still, if you want your interpretation to be, well, scientific, then you have to be able to provide evidence and to explain the evidence. Remember again, this is not what the writer wants to tell us. It's impossible, almost impossible to do that. Why? Because first of all, the writer might not be reachable. They can be elsewhere. It's very, well, it's very unlikely for us to see the writer. And even if we already see the writer, maybe the writer doesn't really remember exactly what they wanted to present through the story. So let's leave this aside. And besides, most of the works that we read, or many of the works that we read, were written by people who are now already dead. So unless you know supernatural skills to call their spirits, then it's impossible for us to get to what the writer actually intends. All right, now let's go to the questions. Let me give you examples of questions that you can ask in literary analysis or literary critique. Now, what are the questions? For the characters, for example, we can ask questions as simple as, what kind of fish is Marlin's father? Or is Nemo, not Marlin's father? I'm sorry, there's a typo there. What kind of fish is Marlin? The answer can be as simple as Marlin is a clownfish. And that's a logical question, right? That is, you can find the answer to that in the story, because the other fishes say that Marlin is a clownfish and always ask him, are you funny? Okay. Now, it can also ask something more elaborative. How does he raise Nemo? How does he raise the sun? Does he raise the sun with a lot of restrictions? Does he liberate the sun? And so on. You can answer this by looking at the story and probably by comparing it to outside knowledge from what you read in articles or magazines about how parents raise children. Or if you want to go into a deeper or more elaborative questions, you can ask, what kind of father is Marvin? Is he a thoughtful father? Is he an orthodox father, or is he a conservative father? Is he a strict father, and so on? You can ask this question. About the plot, we can ask questions as simple as, how does Nemo get caught by the diver? This is a question that you can answer by summarizing how Nemo eventually gets caught. Or you can ask, what kind of creatures do Marlin see on the way to saving Nemo? Are they nice creatures? Are they wild creatures? Are they wild creatures, but who are nice to him? And so on. You can ask such questions. Now, you can also ask, why can't Nemo and Marlin meet easily? This is a complex question because it includes a lot of elements in the story, and it also includes Nemo's being stubborn, or Marlin being determined, or Nemo being a loving father who eventually, a loving son who eventually understands the father, and so on. So you can ask these questions. Now, last one is about the setting. You can ask logical questions or elaborative questions about the setting as well. A logical question would be, where do Nemo and Marlin live? They live in reef, or later in the movie we find out that they live in the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. Now, you can also ask a question like this: is it a good place to see animals to live, for sea animals to live? You will have to answer this question by looking at the movie, and later on probably by finding information about Sydney and whether people over there like to catch fish or like to torture fish and so on, just like one of the characters in the movie. So these are the kind of questions that you can ask. By asking these questions, you can get details about the story, details about the characters, about the plot, and about the settings. And when you already have the details, then you can use them to help interpret the work and discover or decide what the theme of the work actually is for you, okay, based on your interpretation. All right, now, that's just one. Later on, we still have time. We can go deeper into inferring prose further. How do we do that? Let me give you just, a quick view of what you can do. You can do that by, first of all, summarizing the work, and then knowing elements of prose, which both of these you have done, okay? And deeper, you can also ask about the tone of the story. The tone can be humorous, happy, scary, and so on. And to go deeper, you might want to know about the context of the creation, whether this movie is created in 2017 or this movie was created in 2001. This information, this difference can make our interpretation of the story different, okay? So the context of the creation is important. whether a story is created in Australia or in the United States or before the World War II or after the World War II. These all details about the story can be very important or can help you make further interpretation of the prose work. This is not only about the theme of the work, but later on I will give you, okay? And you can also ask questions about the context of the consumption. It can be about whether the story is usually enjoyed by Indonesian or whether the story is enjoyed by African, American, Australian, and so on. So this information, along with many others that I cannot put here, can eventually lead to our argument, our opinion of the work. This is what essayists, people who write essay, like to do, okay? We try to analyze literary works, not only for the theme of the story, but we make connection between the theme and many other elements to go deeper or to go further with our interpretation. But let us save this for later. Let's focus now more on interpreting the theme of the work, okay? Yes, so shall we? I think that's all. If you have any question, feel free to ask me, and I will give you a practice or an exercise after this. So I'll see you soon, guys. Thank you very much. Bye.